Hello, dear listeners, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the day quietly fade away. We're about to walk through quiet forests and peaceful villages, where simple stories teach wise lessons. First, we'll follow a little girl in a red hood on her journey through the woods. Then, we'll meet a clever daughter whose wisdom surprises everyone around her. So relax, and let these two timeless tales guide you softly into sleep. Once there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother. The old woman did not know what to give the child, and once she gave her a little cap of red velvet. It suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, and so she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood. Here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it grows hot, and when you are walking, go nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path. If you do, you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing." Little Red Riding Hood promised to obey her mother, and took leave of her. Her grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village, and just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the forest, a wolf met her. Little Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "Thank you kindly, wolf," she answered. "Where are you going so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "And what have you got in your basket?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live?" asked the wolf. "A good quarter of a league farther on in the wood. Her house stands under 3 large oak trees. The nut trees are just below. You surely must know it," replied Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "This tender young creature would be a nice mouthful for me, better than the old woman. I must act cleverly so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Riding Hood and then said, "See, Little Red Riding Hood, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look around? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk gravely along as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in the wood is merry." Little Red Riding Hood raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought, "Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too." She ran from the path into the wood to gather flowers. Meanwhile the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" "Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf. "She is bringing you cake and wine. Open the door." "Lift the latch," called out the grandmother. "I am too weak, and cannot get up." The wolf lifted the latch, the door sprang open, and without saying a word he went straight to the grandmother's bed and swallowed her up. Then he put on her clothes, laid himself in her bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood, however, had been running about picking flowers, and when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother and set out on the way to her house. She was surprised to find the door standing open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself, "Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today, and at other times I like being with grandmother so much." She called out, "Good morning," but received no answer. Then she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother, with her cap pulled far over her face, and looking very strange. "Grandmother," she said gently, "what big arms you have! All the better to hug you with, my dear. Grandmother, what big legs you have! All the better to run with, my child. Grandmother, what big ears you have! All the better to hear you with, my dear. Grandmother, what big eyes you have! All the better to see you with. Grandmother, what big hands you have! All the better to hold you with. And grandmother," she whispered at last, "what a terribly big mouth you have! All the better to eat you with." And with that, the wolf sprang from the bed and swallowed Little Red Riding Hood whole. After eating his fill, the wolf lay down and fell into a deep sleep, snoring loudly. A huntsman happened to be passing the house and thought, "How the old woman is snoring. I must just see if she wants anything." He went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw the wolf lying there. "So here I find you, you old sinner," said the huntsman. "I have long sought you." He was just about to shoot him when it occurred to him that the wolf might have swallowed the grandmother, and that she might still be saved. So he did not shoot, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the wolf's stomach. When he had made 2 snips, he saw the little red cap shining, and then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out, crying, "Ah, how frightened I have been! How dark it was inside the wolf!" And after that the old grandmother came out alive, but scarcely able to breathe. Little Red Riding Hood quickly fetched great stones with which they filled the wolf's belly. When he awoke and wanted to run away, the stones were so heavy that he fell down dead. Then all 3 were glad. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine that Little Red Riding Hood had brought, and grew well again. And Little Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never leave the path and run into the wood by myself, when my mother has forbidden me to do so." And after this they all lived in peace. The Peasant's Clever Daughter. Long ago, when kings still ruled from stone castles and most people lived by the strength of their hands, there stood a tiny village at the edge of wide green fields and whispering forests. The houses there were small and crooked, their roofs patched with straw and moss, their doors worn smooth by years of wind and rain. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys each morning, and the smell of damp earth and wood fire hung constantly in the air. In the poorest hut of all lived a peasant and his only daughter. They owned almost nothing. Their table wobbled, their cups were chipped, and their beds were stuffed with old straw that crackled every time they lay down. In winter, the cold crept through the walls no matter how tightly they stuffed the cracks with rags. In summer, the sun baked the roof until the air inside felt heavy and still. Yet despite their poverty, the hut was not an unhappy place. The father was a quiet, honest man who worked from sunrise to sunset without complaint. His hands were rough as tree bark, and his back bent slightly from years behind the plow. But his eyes were kind, and whenever he looked at his daughter, they softened with pride. For though they had little food and fewer comforts, he knew he possessed something more precious than gold. His daughter was clever in a way that made people stop and think twice. She noticed things others missed. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, her words were simple but always wise. Many evenings, while her father repaired tools or mended the fence, she would sit by the small window watching the sky change colors, quietly thinking, as though the world itself were a puzzle she meant to solve one day. One morning, just as the sun began to glow like pale honey over the fields, the peasant set out to plow a strip of land that belonged to a wealthy farmer. His old ox trudged forward patiently, the wooden plow scraping through the soil with a dull, steady sound. Everything was ordinary, the birds calling, the wind brushing the wheat, until suddenly the plow struck something hard. Clang! The sound rang out strangely against the open air. The peasant stopped, wiped the sweat from his brow, and bent down. He dug carefully with his fingers until something bright gleamed beneath the dirt. It was gold. Not a coin, not a ring, but a heavy golden mortar, smooth and shining as though it had just been polished. His heart began to race. He had never held anything so valuable in his life. For a long moment he simply stared at it, the sunlight flashing against its surface. Thoughts rushed through his mind: food for years, warm clothes, maybe even a new house. But just as quickly, another thought followed. "This must belong to the king," he muttered. "Treasure like this is not for people like me." So he wrapped it carefully in cloth and hurried home. When he showed it to his daughter, her eyes widened, but not with greed. Instead, she studied it quietly, turning it in her hands as though weighing more than its metal. "I should take it to the king tomorrow," the father said. "It is only right." She nodded slowly, then asked, "Did you find anything else with it?" "No, only this." She grew thoughtful. "Father, listen carefully. Kings are powerful, but they are often suspicious. If you bring only this mortar, he may think there was a pestle too and that you kept it for yourself. He might accuse you of stealing." The peasant's face fell. "But I found nothing else." "I know," she said gently. "And because you are honest, you must go anyway. Tell the truth and fear nothing." The next day, trembling but determined, he carried the golden mortar to the castle. The king accepted it, but just as the girl predicted, his eyes narrowed. "Where is the pestle?" he demanded sharply. "There was none, your majesty." "I swear it." "Strange," said the king. "No mortar exists without its pair." Then he leaned forward. "Who told you to bring this to me?" "My daughter, sire." "Ah," said the king slowly, a spark of interest lighting his face. "Then perhaps your daughter is wiser than you. Let us see how wise she truly is." He sent the peasant home with a message, a riddle that sounded impossible. The message said the daughter must come to the castle not dressed and not naked, not riding and not walking, not by day and not by night. If she succeeded, the king would reward them. If she failed, punishment would follow. The father nearly collapsed when he heard it, but the girl only smiled as though someone had handed her a pleasant game to solve. "That is all?" she said. "Then we have nothing to fear." Before dawn the next morning, when the sky was neither dark nor light but painted in soft gray, she wrapped herself loosely in an old fishing net. It covered her without truly clothing her. Then she tied one end of the net to their donkey. As the donkey walked forward, she allowed herself to be pulled along, her feet barely touching the ground, not quite riding, not quite walking. The air was cool and silent. Birds had not yet begun to sing, neither night nor day. When she reached the castle gates, the guards stared as though a spirit had drifted out of a dream. The king himself came to see. For a long moment he simply watched her approach. Then a broad smile spread across his face. She had solved every part of the riddle perfectly. He began to laugh, not mockingly, but with true delight. "I have tested many people," he said, "but none as clever as you." From that day forward, everything changed. The peasant and his daughter were given a small house, warm meals, and land to farm. But the king found himself asking for her advice again and again. Whenever disputes arose or problems tangled the court like knotted rope, she untied them with a few calm words. And over time, the king realized something simple and rare. Wisdom does not grow only in palaces. Sometimes it grows quietly, in poor little huts, beside people who have nothing but clear minds and honest hearts. So he kept her near him always. And though she never forgot where she came from, her cleverness carried her farther than riches ever could. And people would later say, whenever a fair decision was made or a difficult matter solved, "Thank the clever peasant girl, for she sees what the rest of us miss." And that, they say, is how intelligence, not gold, not power, not birth, changed one simple life forever.